2 Peter chapter 3, let's start in verse 16. So these verses are very important for you guys to keep in mind as we're talking about logical fallacies and mistakes people make in their thinking, because there's a lot of influence out there, right? And there's a lot of people using bad logic and really just illogic to persuade people to believe truth claims. Okay? And is everyone good? Why is there so much talking? Okay. So, 2 Peter chapter 3, I need a reader. Who wants to read? Who wants to read?
No.
Maya, please read verse 16. So if you don't have a Bible, you can look up on the screen. I'm going to give a little preface. In Paul's epistles, go ahead. Hopefully you have a translation that will make sense with this. Just read up here. Go. Right here. In Paul's epistles,
some things are hard to understand, which untaught and unstable people twist to their own destruction, as they do also the rest of the scriptures.
okay, think about that. How many of you guys have ever read any of Paul's epistles? Romans through like Philemon. There's some stuff that could be hard to understand, right? And Peter says that untaught and unstable people, what do they do with the scriptures? They twist it. And what does it lead to? What does it lead to?
Destruction.
Their own destruction, right? And they don't just do it with Paul's epistles, they do it with the rest of the scriptures. So here's the application for you and me. Emmanuel, read the next verse right here. You therefore.
Yeah. In Paul's epistles, some things are hard to understand.
Start here. Next verse. The application for us.
You therefore, beloved, since you know this is beforehand, beware lest you all also fall from your own steadfastness, being led away with the error of religion.
Powerful warning and powerful reminder to us. Beware lest you also be led astray. Okay? So, with that being said, we're going to get into some more logical fallacies tonight. If you're taking notes, the first one is called cherry picking. Everyone say cherry picking.
Cherry picking.
Also known as, it has different names. Another name is stacking the deck. Another name is suppressing the evidence. Okay, you guys know what it means to suppress? What's it mean, Nico?
To
Yeah.
no,
Subdue or
subdue, yeah.
to push it down. Yeah, guys, suppress means to push down. So cherry picking, stacking the deck, it's suppressing, it's pushing down, keeping away evidence. So this is basically the fallacy. It's when you quote unquote stack the deck. You know, like in cards. Have you ever heard of it when like a magician tries to do a trick, or you're playing cards with someone and they stack the deck? They look at the cards first and organize them in such a way that it's going to be in their favor. That's the idea behind this fallacy. They stack the deck of the argument in their favor by intentionally doing two things. The first, they only offer examples that support their case, okay? While at the exact same time, they're intentionally ignoring and leaving out evidence that goes against their argument. Okay, does that make sense? Does that make sense, anybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so an example, a classic example of this while people are writing this down. Atheists, there's not all atheists, of course, but there's a lot of atheists that do this, especially when it comes to talking about, religion or Christianity or the existence of God. They'll say things like, man, you know what? Religion is a poison. Religion is horrible for society because, it destroys people's lives. Just look, for example, at like the Crusades. Okay, in the name of religion and the name of God, people just massacred and killed so many people. Okay, what's the problem with that argument?
He's leaving out a duration of when religion has brought people together in a positive way.
Did you guys hear that? Excellent. That person is leaving out a ton of evidence to the contrary of how religion has been beneficial to society, right? What are some ways that Christianity, let's just take our religion, what are some ways that Christianity has been beneficial to society or the world? Zach?
Gotten people out of dark places.
Okay, gotten them out of addictions or dark places. Good. What else? Wow, none of you guys can think of anything that Christianity has done for the betterment of the world? Melanie?
It brings people together in good ways, like here today, obviously.
Okay.
And then
Yeah, let's just do one each. Yeah, that's a good one.
We got Chick-fil-A.
Okay.
Gospel
Seabass.
gospel is good, and we also get peace.
Okay, it can bring peace, right? Or it has brought peace, right? Good. What else?
We help the homeless, the orphans, the widows. We have a lot of people that need to be helped, but no one else.
Excellent. Think of how many hospitals have been built around the world, especially in war-torn or impoverished places, and guess who it was that started them? Christians in the name of who?
God.
Jesus. Right? So think of all the benefits that have happened. Yeah, Gabe.
It gives us truth.
Okay, excellent. So do you guys see the problem here for the atheist who makes this argument? They're leaving out a ton of evidence that goes totally contrary to their claim. So here's a couple videos for you guys of some examples. So this guy on the right, this is Stephen A. Smith. He's an ESPN commentator, and he's on the show called The View, which if you guys want really easy pickings to find tons of logical fallacies, I won't even suggest watching The View because it's just a load of BS. But if you want to really easily find logical fallacies, you can find them there. But with that being said, the ladies on the panel around this table, they asked him, hey, they're talking about what men say about women, when men are together. So they all ask him, yeah, what do men say about us women? Okay, so listen closely. Remember, we're studying the cherry-picking fallacy. See where you can find some cherry-picking going on.
Now, what do men say about us behind closed doors? Yeah.
Say it to our
tell.
face.
Yeah, do tell.
I don't hide, so no worries there. Here's the deal. I respectfully disagree with Howard Stern, only from the standpoint that I wish he had been more specific. Why don't you say white men? Because let me tell you something about black men. We love our mamas.
I know that.
We revere black women. And when we're trifling, we know it's us. It's not them.
Right, yeah.
You understand? So when he's saying that, okay, well, let's talk about white men. We have a white power structure that still exists in this country today. I understand the white populace in this country was over 85% at one time. It's now dipped to about 57.4%.
Yeah.
The white power structure is still in place. So when we talk about misogyny, when we talk about chauvinism, when we talk about women not necessarily being empowered, well, who's in a position of power to surrender some of that power? It's white men. So I think that when Howard Stern was talking, I can't speak to what white men are thinking. I can tell you this much: black men, we revere women.
Yeah.
We don't have any problem looking at a woman as a leader.
Okay, so there's a couple problems with this argument, okay? One, he commits the fallacy, one of them that we talked about last week, which is what?
Genetic.
Hasty generalization, right? Generalizing on an entire group of people. But then, how does he cherry pick?
They first ask what do they say behind their back, then they change the context to race.
Okay, sort of. So he's actually addressing, and I forgot to mention this. He's addressing something that another guy named Howard Stern had said previously regarding, men's view of women. And so that's the reason he brought that up. But how does he cherry pick?
He's cherry picking by only separating their race, but I know for a fact that black men don't think like that, and by throwing the white men under the bus, saying only they are the ones who think like that and objectify or doing that to women.
Okay, are there a lot of black men that revere women?
Of course.
For sure, of course, right? And you can find that in almost any race, and maybe any race of people, that there are many men in whatever race that revere women of that race, right? But you could also find in every single race men that do not revere and respect women, right? Mm-hmm. Agreed?
Agreed.
So one of the problems here in the statement that he makes is he says in the beginning, and actually at the end as well, that black men, okay, and that's just generalizing kind of all black men, that black men revere women. But there's actually quite a bit of evidence that can go against his argument, right? I'll give you just one example. It's in the area of music, and a specific genre of music? Rap.
Rap.
Okay? Now, there are several black rappers that I love to listen to, Christian rappers, and they have amazing music. There's other black rappers who are not Christian that their music is clean. But there's a lot of black rappers that in their lyrics, are they loving toward women?
No.
Are they respectful to women?
No.
Are they revering women? Are they treating women with dignity?
No.
No way, right? And there's white rappers that do the same thing. But since he says black men revere women, it's like, well, maybe I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's never listened to possibly the majority of rap out there. I'd say, just giving a little guess, maybe at least 50% of rap out there. Again, that's not like an exact number. I'm just spitballing here. But maybe even 50% of rap is not very respectful toward women. Okay? So do you see the problem of cherry picking? Now, there are many black men that revere women, and that's good. That's biblical, right? But to say that generalize all of them that do this, that's you could show much evidence of very famous black rappers that are horrible toward women. And and that influences, because I was just discipling someone the other day about the music he listens to, a different genre of music, but what you listen to, guys, it influences, it works its way down in your heart, and it's like, oh, I don't believe the lyrics. Well, maybe, not at first, but sometimes it can eventually have an influence, and you start thinking that way, and it can shape your worldview. Here's another example. So this is from the TV show called The West Wing. So in this show, this guy is the president, and they're having a discussion, and there's a lady who's present, who is supposedly like a Christian. So listen to what is said here.
I like how you call homosexuality an abomination.
I don't say homosexuality is an abomination, Mr. President. The Bible does.
Yes, it does. Leviticus
18:22.
chapter and verse. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions while I had you here. I'm interested in selling my youngest daughter into slavery as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7. She's a Georgetown sophomore, speaks fluent Italian, always cleared the table when it was her turn. What would a good price for her be? While thinking about that, can I ask another? My chief of staff, Leo McGarry, insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly says he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or is it okay to call the police? Here's one that's really important, because we've got a lot of sports fans in this town. Touching the skin of a dead pig makes one unclean, Leviticus 11:7. If they promise to wear gloves, can the Washington Redskins still play football? Can Notre Dame? Can West Point? Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side? Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from two different threads? Think about those questions, would you?
Okay, so the writers of this show, they were very mindful of what they were doing here. Okay, can you guys see what they're doing now? If you don't know your Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy books, some of that may have gone over your head. But he's referencing several passages and the penalty for breaking these different laws in these passages. Okay, so what's kind of the message here?
Christianity's bad.
Okay.
Well, Christianity have like silly rules.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're gonna say follow one, follow all of them. That's kind of
Okay. Yeah. Bible's outdated. Yeah.
Christianity cherry pick their own what rules to follow.
Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting because you know what the writers of this show do? They cherry pick quite a few passages here. Taking them, by the way, this is super important. They take a lot of these passages out of context, not just the context of the scripture, but the cultural, historical, grammatical context as well. And by doing that, they're exposing their own ignorance of what good Bible study is, what good hermeneutics is. You guys remember what hermeneutics is? It's the method by which you study Scripture. So they're exposing their own terrible hermeneutic. They're just picking stuff that they think is ridiculous and then just throw it in there without even looking at the historical context or the cultural context and whatnot. In fact, here's something interesting, guys. The writers of this show are actually showing that they know about as much about the Bible as they do about modern football. Did you catch the football reference?
Yeah.
So, footballs are actually made of leather today. They are not made of pigskins. And so they totally got that one wrong. And it's just funny to me because it's like, you know about as much about the Bible as you do about football. Like you're just, maybe another time we can show you guys just how absurd this whole clip is. But here's another one from the atheist Sam Harris. He commits a couple of logical fallacies. One is the argument from personal incredulity. You guys remember that one? Where basically it's, hey, I don't see how this could work, so therefore it's not true. Okay? But he also cherry picks, so listen closely. He's talking in this clip about the Bible and the Quran, two different religious books.
Grant the possibility that there is a creator God who's omniscient, who occasionally authors books. And he's going to give us a book, the most useful book. He's a loving God, he's a compassionate God, and he's going to give us a guide to life. He's got a scribe, the scribe's going to write it down. What's going to be in that book? I mean, just think of how good a book would be if it were authored by an omniscient deity. I mean, there is not a single line in the Bible or the Quran that could not have been authored by a first century person. I mean, there's not one reference to anything. There are pages and pages about how to sacrifice animals and keep slaves and who to kill and why. There's nothing about electricity. There's nothing about DNA. There's nothing about how to infectious disease, the principles of infectious disease. There's nothing particularly useful, and there's a lot of Iron Age barbarism in there and superstition. This is not a candidate book. I mean, I can go into to any Barnes and Noble blindfolded and pull a book off a shelf which is going to have more relevance, more wisdom for the 21st century than the Bible or the Quran. I mean, it's really not an exaggeration.
Wow.
So, what do you guys think? Thoughts?
No.
Oh, I thought you raised your hand. Yes.
You're gonna pick, he's gonna do it. He says, oh, there's gonna be more wisdom in any book that you get from the library. You pick up a Harry Potter book. What do you learn from the first book?
You know, one of the
Don't
things that
touch
I would
people.
ask him is like, dude, have you ever been to a Barnes and Noble? Like, I mean, there's cooking books. There's like fantasy fiction books, like science fiction, and you know, like the Hunger Games. That's gonna have more wisdom. And apparently he hasn't. I mean, maybe he's read the whole Bible, but if he has, he really wasn't paying much attention because there's a lot of really important wisdom, right? So again, totally cherry picking. Yeah.
He also says there's nothing about illness or sickness in the Bible. That's completely not true.
Completely false. Great point. Like in Leviticus, especially of how to treat leprosy and contagious diseases, and God gives the Israelites the instruction to bury their human waste. Okay, don't just what was common in that day is people would just, you know, drop a deuce just right there on the ground and then just leave it, and then someone steps in it and you got like maggots and all this different stuff, and it's like people would get so many diseases, and yet the Bible actually contains quite a bit about things, medical things. In fact, there's a really good book if you're ever interested in reading it. I have it. It's called None of These Diseases. It's a phenomenal book written by two doctors who show different passages of scripture of the Old Testament, like mostly Exodus and Leviticus, mostly Leviticus and I think Numbers, and show how that was just like amazing wisdom for that time, okay? So his main contention is this, guys, in all good, basically if in all good, all-knowing God would write a book himself, divinely inspired, to give humanity, it would be a lot better than what we have in the Bible. Can you think of a good question to ask in response? If an all good, all-knowing God would write a book that would be so good for humanity, the best thing for humanity, it would be better than what we have in the Bible. What question can you ask in response?
How do you know?
Okay, good. According to who? Right? According to who, Sam? Like you? Why, like who made you the standard for determining, if it would be better than the Bible? It's very important. Do you guys see the problem there? He says, I think it would be better than it is. Like, it's not as good as I think it would be, so therefore it can't be divinely inspired. But again, that's the argument from personal incredulity. Just because you don't see how it could be helpful, just because you don't see how God wouldn't have written about the invention of electricity, it's like, therefore it can't be divinely inspired. It's like, no, that's not a good argument. That's actually a pretty bad argument. So here's another logical fallacy. This is called the appeal to lack of evidence. And there's a kind of a few different fallacies here that we're going to look at. This is where someone says that a claim is true simply on the basis that it hasn't been proven false. Or vice versa. They say that a claim is false simply because it hasn't been proven true yet. Okay? The point here is that rather than giving this important thing called evidence for their claim, to support their claim, they just say, well, it's true because there's no evidence against it yet. Or at least evidence to disprove it. That is not a good way to make an argument. Alright, so keep that in mind. We're gonna kind of show you some examples of that in a minute, but there's actually a few different kinds of fallacies that are really similar to this. You have another one that's called an argument from ignorance. You guys ever heard that one before?
Yes.
An argument from ignorance typically claims that something is true simply because it hasn't been proven false, or that something's false simply because it hasn't been proven true. So the argument from ignorance, you know what it relies on? A total absence of any evidence. Okay, now a different one is called an argument from silence. Now this, it uses not a total absence of evidence, but just a lack of evidence as proof for your claim. Okay, and then you have, the appeal to lack of evidence. So these three are different, but here's where they're all similar. They all use a lack of evidence to draw a conclusion. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah.
I was just saying, what about in a criminal sense? In the power of justice system, it's proof of guilt. It's innocent.
Innocent until proven guilty. Yeah, good question. So there are times where a lack of evidence is important, right? But here, let me explain a couple of things, and it might make a little more sense. So, oh wait, you know what? Okay, I have a couple videos, and then I'll give you a couple scenarios to add to that. But that does bring up a good point. There are specific situations where a lack of evidence is important, but I'll explain that in a few minutes. So this is an atheist, Alex O'Connor. He's British, generally a really respectful guy, and he's debating a bunch of professing Christians in the room, okay? Now his claim at the top is that there is an insufficient amount of evidence to believe in the resurrection of Jesus, okay? So listen closely to what happens, because they actually totally get off track here. They're really not even talking about the resurrection of Jesus. What they're talking about in this clip and the next one is in Matthew's gospel, it says that when Jesus died, right after he died, there was an earthquake, and then there were several people in Jerusalem who came out of their graves, and then after Jesus rose from the dead, these people went out of their graves and like testified to people. Okay? So he gets off track from his actual claim and then gets down this rabbit trail. So listen closely.
So there's one point you kind of keep going back to is the opening of the graves. And you're saying we're not seeing that anywhere in history. And I kind of agree with what Van was saying, is this is an argument of silence. So we don't see anywhere in history the destruction of Pompeii being written down through Vesuvius.
Mm-hmm.
This is a huge event.
Sure.
Why don't we see that?
But if we had accounts describing Pompeii around the time that happened and they just didn't mention it, you don't think that would be a bit suspect?
Well, we don't see anything talking about the destruction of Pompeii.
Sure, but if we had accounts that were written about Pompeii at the time of the destruction and they didn't mention it, do you think that would be weird?
Yeah, I do think that would be
so
a
we
little
have
bit odd.
accounts written about Jesus in Jerusalem at the time that this extraordinary event was supposed to take place, and they didn't even think to mention it.
Okay, you guys see the issue? Remember, they're not even talking about the resurrection of Jesus. They're talking about these people that Matthew mentions when Jesus died, these people in Jerusalem who came out of their graves and then they went around and appeared to people, testified to people. Okay? Do you see the problem with this argument? Ian?
He's cherry picking and he's making the Christians look bad, like you know, in the video.
Okay, yeah, here's the important point, guys. Just because we don't have accounts of other people except Matthew writing about it, is that a good enough reason not to believe what Matthew says? No. I mean, let's say we're all in a room, in this room tonight, and some crazy event happens, okay? And only one of you goes and writes down about the event, and then 2,000 years from now, you know, like, let's say you wrote about other things, some of you guys, but only one of you writes about this specific event having to do with tonight. Does that mean that you're the one person who wrote about it are not reliable? No, just because you're the only one doesn't mean that it's not credible, okay? By the way, think of all the possible scenarios for why Matthew could be the only one that we have that records this event. Do you think it's possible that other people could have written about it and we just don't have the copies of those other records? For sure. I mean, guys, we're talking about 2,000 years after the fact. And people didn't write on the types of materials we do today. They have like papyrus that fades and wears out over time. Or it could have been that some people had an agenda for why they didn't write this down because it wouldn't go well with their narrative, right? We see that happen all the time today. It could also be that some people at that time they did write, but they just weren't the ones who witnessed these people coming out of their graves. So there's a lot of different reasons why it's not reasonable. But here's a question. I guess we could play this video really quick, and then you guys we can discuss a little more. Okay, I guess
here's how we know that the resurrection of Jesus historically happened.
Okay.
So can I start with the question
Yes,
for you, for example? Do you believe that the graves opened and that the holy ones were walking around the city of Jerusalem, appearing to many people? Why is this not reported in any other Gospels, any other historical account, anywhere? Given that this is the most extraordinary thing that's ever happened in human history.
Right. So
Also, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but also crucially, Matthew says, at the time of Jesus' death, there was a huge earthquake, the second earthquake, the graves opened, and that then the holy ones appeared to people after the resurrection to many. So there's this very, very strange passage, which seems strange on the surface, but also says that the graves opened at the time of the crucifixion, but they weren't walking around and appearing to people until after the resurrection. It seems confused, it seems contrived, unless they were like hanging out dead in open graves for like 3 days until they got up or something. It's a very, very strange passage, which I think has no historicity behind it.
Sure, but that's not the same as the claim you originally brought up, which is the resurrection of Christ himself.
That's a good point that he makes, right? You're talking about something that doesn't even have to do with your claim anymore. So Alex is saying, I think Matthew's not reliable because why? We don't have records of anyone else saying what Matthew said. Again, that's not a good enough reason to totally reject an argument. Now, did you catch the question he asked? He says, why? I'll read it. Why is this not recorded in any other Gospels, any other historical accounts, anywhere? Well, here's a couple questions I would like to ask Alex. First is this: what if not just Matthew, but like two of the 4 Gospel accounts recorded it? Would that be enough for you? What if all 4 Gospel accounts recorded this specific event? Would you believe it then? Would you think it was reliable then? Or what if 300 other people wrote about this specific event, but they were all Christians who wrote about it? Would you believe it? Even if they were Christians? Or would you still think it's not reliable? In other words, guys, how many records, how many accounts do you need, personally, Alex, in order to finally believe something to be credible? Do you get the point? And whatever number you choose, why that number? So it's an important point. Okay, let's look at a few other examples. Let's say an atheist. They say God doesn't exist because there's no evidence that he exists. Is that a good argument? What are they appealing to? Hands. Yeah. They're appealing to a lack of evidence. Okay? Now, first of all, is there evidence that God exists?
Yeah.
For sure, right? But let's say even if there, let's say there wasn't necessarily evidence. Is that still a good argument for God not existing?
No.
Not necessarily, no. But see, Christians can also make a similar bad argument, and it's this. No one has proven that God doesn't exist, so therefore God exists. Do you see how that's also a bad argument?
Yeah.
You're appealing to a lack of evidence that would go against your claim.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of really good evidence, so don't do this. Don't say, well, no one's ever proven it to be false, so therefore it's true. Well, that just because no one's proven it false doesn't make it true. Yeah.
Okay, so I've accidentally done this before when I was having.
We probably all have.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
When I was having a conversation with my friend, because we were talking about how the universe came to be around, and that there was no fact of how it was around. And I made the claim that the Big Bang Theory, it states that something came from nothing, which is contradicted by the law of conservation of matter. That says matter cannot be created nor destroyed. So it wouldn't say that, but she said, well, there's no evidence to prove that there is a God, though. There's no evidence to prove basically what is said there.
Yeah, there is really good evidence, like beyond reasonable doubt or inference to the best explanation, which I can give you like some tips, but like the teleological arguments for God's existence are arguments from design. So design demands a designer, and we see design throughout nature. Come to youth camp and you'll find a lot of good examples of that. But there's also an important point, like there is times where it is legitimate to say, I don't believe in this because there's no evidence for it. Because especially atheists and evolutionists love to bash Christians for not having evidence for stuff, and yet they claim to believe in like a Big Bang, or sometimes in the past, some of them have said, well, at one point in the past there was nothing, and then, boom, Big Bang and everything came into existence. But hold on, guys, let's see how smart you are. Nothing can only ever create what? Nothing. That's like fundamental science. And yet, many atheists in the past have said at one point nothing existed, and then somehow stuff came into existence. But nothing can only ever create nothing. Right? So they come up with all these theories because they don't want to believe in an intelligent designer, and yet it's good for us to say, you actually have no evidence for that. So why should I believe it if you can't produce evidence? Okay? So we'll get into that another time though. But here's an important point I just want you guys to keep in mind. Absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. Does that make sense, Emma? Yes? Okay. Absence of evidence. In other words, like for example, have you guys ever heard of, how many guys were here, well I guess not here, but back when we did our youth group Wednesday night apologetic series on the Bible for 4 months, and we did 2 weeks on archaeological evidence for the Bible.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
I'm in, how am I in your way? Fine, I'll go over here. So, the Hittite people. You guys ever heard of them? They're mentioned over 40 times in the Old Testament. Now, for many years, skeptics said, Hittites, they're a joke. Bible's not reliable because there's no evidence that the Hittites ever existed. We've never found any of it in archaeological discoveries. Hittites didn't exist, and so the Bible is a fraud. What's the problem with that? Yes, just because you don't have archaeological evidence for the Hittite people, is that evidence that they never existed? No, because think about it. Is archaeology like a very quick process? It takes a long time. The earth is really big, and you got to dig through who knows how many feet of stuff to find stuff. Guess what happened in 1906? You have a German archaeologist named Hugo Winkler, who he uncovered this insanely massive library of 20,000 tablets about the Hittite Empire, the lost Hittite Empire. Guess who today says the Hittites never existed? No one. Because we have all this archaeological evidence for it. But does that mean that until the archaeological evidence existed, it's reasonable to say, well, they never existed? No, just because you don't have the evidence right now for this lost people doesn't mean they never existed. Okay, here's another example for you. Watch this. Okay. All right.
Perfect.
That's pretty cool.
How many of you guys have seen people use arguments like this against Christians?
All the time.
Okay, how would you guys respond to this?
Well, here's the Bible, and here's where it says it.
Okay, all right, good. You ready to bust out your Bible and show those
No.
passages? Oh, okay. So, time to study the Bible.
It says a lot about a fool.
Now, guys, check it out. Let's just say, for sake of argument, let's grant him, just for sake of argument, that Jesus did not talk about any of those issues that he mentioned, homosexuality, abortion, whatever else he mentioned. Let's just say, for sake of argument, that Jesus never talked about that. So, question, what would that prove? What could we conclude about Jesus' silence on those issues? What could we conclude from Jesus' silence?
It wasn't an issue at the time?
No, what can we logically conclude from Jesus not talking about those things? Guess what? Absolutely nothing. You guys get that? Think about it. You can't use Jesus not talking about something as evidence that Jesus would have supported it. Let's say, for sake of argument, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality. Is it fair then to say, well, he must have supported it?
No.
Of course not. I mean, think about it, guys. You know what other topics Jesus never talked about that we have records of? Husbands beating their wives. Slavery.
Playing soccer on Sunday morning.
There you go. Kidnapping. Oh, you're talking about missing church in order to play soccer. Interesting. Human sacrifice. We have no records of Jesus talking about those things. Does that mean Jesus, can we then conclude, well, Jesus must have affirmed those things? Of course not. Okay? So just because we don't have a record of Jesus saying, hey, here's my stance on these issues, you cannot conclude that he affirmed those things as good. So what's the message? What's this guy trying, what point is he trying to make in this video? Yeah, he's trying to make a claim about what Jesus believed about these things based on what Jesus didn't say. Okay, which is horrible argument. Also, the hidden message here is that Jesus only ever talked about what? love and forgiveness. But this dude right here is clearly exposing his own ignorance of the Bible because, Jesus talked quite a bit about things like hell, sin, the need for repentance, future judgment, and so on and so forth. Let's just finish up with a couple quick ones. Here's another logical fallacy: non sequitur. Okay, everyone say non sequitur. This is where your conclusion does not follow from your premises. Remember, what's a premise? What's a premise? Come on, Vaughn, help me out. Premise is like a reason. Okay, so your conclusion is what you want to persuade people to believe, right? And then your premises are your reasons why you want them to believe your conclusion. Make sense? So let's say someone says something like this. Premise 1, premise 2, and then based on these, you should believe this conclusion. All lions have legs. That creature over there has legs, therefore that creature is a lion. Does the conclusion follow?
No.
That the creature over there, Dakota, is a lion because, well, all lions have legs and that creature over there has legs? Does the conclusion follow?
No.
No, of course not. Okay? So that's what a non sequitur is, where you're making an argument and your conclusion doesn't follow from whatever you're saying before. Ian.
So since I'm a creature, so am I technically a lion?
No, you don't have 4 legs.
Wait.
Josiah. Yeah, I guess so. All right, so check this one out. Someone says, well, we must be doing something right because we're being persecuted for it. You guys ever heard a Christian say that? How many of you guys ever heard a Christian say that? Hey, we must be doing something right because, the enemy must be mad at us because we're experiencing opposition. Okay, that's possible, for sure. But guess who else makes this exact same argument? Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, even atheists. Are they doing something right because they're getting persecuted?
No.
The conclusion does not follow that just because you're being opposed or persecuted, you're therefore doing the right thing. Okay? Now, sometimes as Christians, we may be getting persecuted because we're doing what's right, but you got to give a good argument for why that's happening, right? You can't just say, oh, well, I'm being persecuted, so, sometimes Christians get persecuted for being stupid. For real. Hey, put it away. For example, when I was in Bible college, I lived in Jerusalem for a time. And I had a friend in Bible college who wanted to go down to one of the holiest sites for Jews. And he wanted to make those little pamphlets, gospel tracts, and just chuck them into the air and say, Yeshua HaMashiach, which means Jesus is the Messiah. And he's like, you want to go with me? And I'm like, no. I know why you want to do this. Because you're looking to get persecuted so that you could say, hey, I got persecuted for following Jesus. What you want to do is stupid. Okay? And if sometimes you could get persecuted for being an idiot. That doesn't mean you're being persecuted for doing the right thing. You can't say, well, I must be doing something right. No, not necessarily. All right? So next week we'll look at red herring. So I think we'll just finish. A red herring is not only like Ellie is a herring, but a herring is also a fish. So I think next week I got some great videos here for you. Oh man, we'll finish with this one. Okay, complex question. This is where you ask a question in such a way that if a person answers yes or no, they're basically committing to a claim that you're promoting, and it's really like a manipulative thing. So if someone says to you, hey, when did you stop murdering people? That's an example of a logical fallacy called a complex question, because no matter how you answer, you're in trouble, right? If you say never, what are you admitting to?
You're killing people.
I've always been murdering people, right? If you say 5 years ago, because, well, that'll make me look good. Well, you're admitting I used to murder people and I've been clean 5 years, right? It's the whole purpose here is a trap. And it's kind of like a false dilemma, just giving you two options. Or if someone says, hey, when did you stop beating your wife? Okay, well, how am I supposed to respond to that if someone asks me?
Like that
I never did.
about God creating you older to have rights.
Right. So here's an example of this.
Oh, I've seen
Hi, I'm Sarah McLaughlin. Will you be an angel for a helpless animal?
All right. So, will you be an angel, Emma, for a helpless animal? If you say yes, that means you have to give him your money. Because that's what they're saying. If you say no, you're basically saying, I'm horrible because I'm not willing to give to your cause. But guys, is that reasonable? No, because it's like, hey, what if I say, no, I don't want to give to your cause because I don't know anything about your cause? Or I don't believe in your cause. Or, it could be a different, or hey, I'm broke, So, anyways, complex question. Be careful of those. So, I got some other ones for you guys next week, but we'll finish there. If you guys have any questions, so next week, we will most likely finish our last week on logical fallacies. Okay? I'll give it to you after. So we'll do probably one more week on logical fallacies, and then we'll move on to something new stuff. Okay? Cool? Yes.
Can we do Jeopardy before that?
No.
Wow, what a bunch of haters.
I have one of the most, this is gonna go down in history as a classic picture of Emma holding up a sign with the most annoyed face of I'm doing this, and the sign says shut up. It's great. Maybe I'll post it. All right. Let's pray. Yeah, could you please, God, we